It's 2 a.m. in Kyoto, 2000 in Beirut, 1800 here in London and 1300 in New York City. That's the time on Monocle Radio, brought to you by Chanel Watches. New York's mayor may not, it turns out, have been working exclusively for the city. Israel presses ahead against Hezbollah, warns that there is more where it came from, and one of Japan's and the world's most famous gaming brands builds a shrine to itself. I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Julie Norman and Charles Hecker will discuss today's big stories, and our weekly letter from is postmarked Romania and heavily bear-oriented. Yes, it's a sign of the times. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Julie Norman, lecturer in politics and international relations at UCL and co-director of the UCL Centre on US Politics, and Charles Hecker, senior partner at Control Risks. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Good evening.
Charles, we are apparently getting to the point at which we can actually plug your book without making fun of you for not having finished writing it.
That's right. I have finished writing it, and all I'm doing right now is chasing errant semicolons, and it will soon be hitting ink and paper and will be out on November 28th.
This is tremendously exciting. When do you get that joyous moment of getting the book of first editions, of first editions delivered to you, opening the box, lifting out one copy, savouring a dream realised, opening to a random page and seeing a massive typographical error? Because I promise you that is what will happen. I mean, without fail, every damn time.
I have been told over and over again by people as wise as yourself that you don't have to look for typos when your book comes out. You just open it to a random page and one will jump out at you. That is meant to happen, I think, some point in October. The boxes will be ready before it hits the bookstores.
You can set your watch by it. The title, so our readers have got it in their Christmas lists already.
Thank you, Andrew. The title is Zero Sum, The Arc of International Business in Russia.
Excellent. We look forward to that. Julie, you have recently been to Switzerland, as I understand it.
Yes, and because I work on international relations, people also often think I'm going for some work-related important thing. Not the case. I am lucky to have very good friends based in Geneva, so I went to see them and my godsons and do a little bit of hiking. So it was a really nice getaway.
What did you make of Geneva? I have been once. I thought it was nice. There is a castle and a lake.
Yeah, I go a lot to see these friends, I've got to say. I don't mind Geneva. I know it has this awful reputation as, like, boring and whatever. I just think it's beautiful. I feel like anywhere you have friends, like, beautiful scenery and, like, decent food around, like, why, how can you not have a good time?
Well, we will have more from both of you shortly, but first to New York City and proof that it's not only Republicans who can be accused of being on the hook to foreign interests who may not have the best interests of the United States at heart. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has been charged with taking bribes and or illegal campaign contributions from foreign nationals. A Turkish motif is recurrent among the lengthy list of upgraded flights, fancy hotels and infusions of cash to which his honour has allegedly been treated, but prosecutors are apparently also taking an interest with the mayor's interactions with China, Israel, Qatar, South Korea and Uzbekistan. Here is some of what the mayor had to say or tried to say earlier.
Today, it was about my phones. Same thing that happened 10 months ago. Today was about my phones. Let's get clear on that.
What were you doing on the phone?
When they removed my phones 10 months ago, people said that all of a sudden the city was going to collapse. It was not going to move forward. Look what has happened over 10 months. Over 10 months, more jobs in the city history, more small businesses open, decrease in crime. You're seeing over and over again success over and over again. So we're going to continue to prosper. We're going to continue to move forward, and we're looking forward to that in the city.
Well, that's cleared everything up. Joining us now from New York is the reporter H.J. Mai. H.J., did people see this indictment coming? Did the recent resignations of the police commissioner and the mayor's chief legal advisor suggest something was brewing?
Yeah, absolutely. As you just mentioned, his administration has been, under scrutiny for a while now. I mean, this investigation started in November of last year, so it's been 10 months now. And there has been a feeling around the city and around people, who have an in with the administration that something was coming. I mean, the mayor himself, before the indictment was unsealed this morning and officially confirmed, released a video statement last night, basically already said, that those claims are entirely false and they're based on lies. So clearly the administration, the mayor, knew that something was coming.
Do we know how much trouble he might potentially be in? I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I have read some of the indictment. It does all sound quite serious.
I mean, it sure does. I think it really depends, how this moves forward. I mean, there's definitely could be, if he gets convicted, if this all moves forward, there definitely could be a potential lengthy prison term. But as we know, how it is sometimes. I mean, he could resign. This could drag on for years. I mean, he clearly has the money, to buy a good defense team. So, this could at the end not be as bad for him personally, but I think for his political future, I mean, it seems like if this is all confirmed, what's in this indictment, that might be it for him.
Well, on that subject, it would seem like resignation would be the obvious way forward when presented with an indictment such as this. But he says for the moment, at least, he's not going to. And of course, he's supposed to be campaigning for re-election next year. He can't possibly think he can do that with this hanging over him, can he?
I mean, looking from the outside in, it would really seem like a big surprise if he, stays on. If Governor Hochul, the governor of New York, she's the only one who has the power to actually, remove him from office. If she's not making a move after all of this. But if he stays in power, if he really, what he said this morning during a press conference, that he has no intention of resigning. I mean, he is facing a tough re-election campaign. There have been, he's been in power since 2022, and there have been a lot of criticisms around, his administration, not just, related to what we now realize, those illegal schemes within his administration, but also, the way he has talked about immigrants who have been coming to the city and, basically said he wants to get rid of New York's status as a so-called missing the word right now, but a city that basically is not trying to deport illegal immigrants. He clearly has, especially within the Democratic Party, he has some people who would love to see him, resign and just leave the political stage.
Just finally, HJ, is it likely that he will come under pressure from Democrats in the federal Congress and elsewhere to go soon and quietly, given that they are trying to win a presidential election? And one of the things they are, of course, tagging their Republican opponent with is that he is on the hook to foreign interests.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even before the indictment, I think, the biggest name that has come out so far was yesterday, New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She basically, called on him to resign. Especially he is facing pressure from left-wing politicians, whether that's in the state, in the city government, or now, from somebody like AOC in Congress. But we haven't heard much from, the more moderate Democrats. But I think that will come. Now that this indictment has been unsealed this morning, I think, the pressure will just increase over the next couple of days. And like I said, a lot depends what Governor Hochul will do in going forward.
HJ Mai in New York City, thank you for joining us. We will have more on that story across tomorrow's news programmes, but for the moment we will bring our panel in because by glorious coincidence we have two New Yorkers at the table. Charles, you first of all, I mean, in the context of New York City politics generally, I mean, is this really that much of an eyebrow arch, or is does this just seem like the sort of thing that New York City mayors tend to get up to?
Well, one thing that happens to most New York City mayors throughout their terms of office is they wind up being hated by at least half the city. And so if you're a Republican, you're hated by the Democrats. If you're a Democrat, you're hated by the Republicans. If you're Bill de Blasio, you're hated by everybody. But it is quite unusual for that hatred or dislike to be provoked by a federal fraud and bribery indictment. So he really has sort of raised the bar fairly high for what happens to New York mayors. But Eric Adams was in political hot water to begin with, and that is that the election process and the primary process will begin next year, and the field of potential rivals for the mayor's office in the Democratic primaries was going to be fairly crowded to begin with, and it has been rumored that it would include the likes of Andrew Cuomo. And you'll recall that Andrew Cuomo resigned as governor of the state of New York as he was facing charges of sexual harassment. So if Andrew Cuomo fancies his chances ahead of you, then you know that you're in trouble going forward.
Julie, just to come back to its potential impact on the presidential campaign, is this a thing that does register nationally, that will change anybody's mind nationally, or will this be a thing where, just as New Yorkers hate their mayor, everybody else in America hates New York?
I think probably the latter. And also as someone with like upstate New York roots, it's also kind of the upstaters are kind of like, yep, this is what you get in the city kind of feeling too. But I would say, yeah, I don't think this is going to like shift the national election in any kind of way, but I do think Democrats need to be careful and specific in their messaging around this, because not only is it the, foreign intervention and that kind of stuff, but it's also, they're running very much on this idea of rule of law, and we're the...
So they are going to want him to pack up and push off pretty swiftly, aren't they?
I would think so, yes. And I do think the calls for his resignation will continue, and he might try and wait it out through the primaries and through the election for the mayor next year, but I think it will be very difficult for him to stretch it out that long.
Well, we continue now in Lebanon, where another day of Israeli airstrikes has reached the southern suburbs of Beirut, which would appear to suggest that Israel has tuned out the call from the United States, the United Kingdom and several more of its panicking allies for a 21-day ceasefire. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu indeed has urged Israel's military to fight in Lebanon with, quote, full force. He will doubtless elaborate on where he thinks this is going when he addresses the UN General Assembly in New York City tomorrow. Julie, there was a lot of conjecture last week that the exploding pagers and walkie-talkies may have been a precursor to something bigger. Does this look like it might be it?
Well, I think it's quite clearly is. And, having been in the region this summer and just saying, you could hear speaking to Israelis that it was going to be a question of when rather than if something was going to happen in Lebanon. For Israel, they saw the situation on the northern border, the tit-for-tat pretty much daily with Hezbollah is just unsustainable. And there was talk for a while about when the war's momentum would essentially shift to the north. So I would say I don't think it was very much of a surprise to people who've been, there and kind of listening to what Israel has been saying. But with that said, just like in Gaza, the sense of what is kind of the long-term end game here is still very much in question. It's one thing to, carry out these operations, start talking about a ground invasion, but where is all this going? And it's still very unclear. And Israel has gotten stuck in Lebanon before. They're to some degree stuck in Gaza now, but they kind of keep pursuing the same strategy.
But on that thought, Charles, and there obviously is a lot to talk about, what the end game of this is and how one conducts oneself before one gets there. But is going after Hezbollah necessarily an unreasonable aspiration for Israel? Because as Julie reminds, Hezbollah has been rocketing Israel more or less continuously since October the 8th, to the extent that I think upwards of 60,000 Israelis have had to be evacuated from their homes near Israel's northern border. I mean, it is an Israeli talking point, sure, but it's not an inaccurate one that nobody would expect any other country on earth to just sort of put up with it.
Well, no, that's exactly right. And there have been 60,000 Israelis displaced from northern Israel who can no longer return to their homes. It is Netanyahu's stated goal that the mission here is to push Hezbollah out of southern Lebanon and away from the border and create a bit of a buffer zone so that those Israelis can return to their homes in the northern part of Israel. I mean, having started a bombing raid on Israel on October 8th in the wake of the attack on October 7th, Israel could not sit by idly. And just as Julie was saying, the moment that was created by the exploding pagers and the exploding walkie-talkies is something that is an opportunity that you can't really waste. And there was no intention of wasting that opportunity. It was made to open that door that they've walked into. And they are going to take maximum advantage of having Hezbollah on the back foot and also having Hezbollah's patron in Iran sort of saying, we're not entirely sure that we're ready to engage in a full-scale war. That is, a rare moment, and Israel will persecute that fully.
Nevertheless, Julie, very much not for the first time, somebody else's war is going to get fought in Lebanon. There have been more than 550 people reported dead already. Can we at least hope that Israel might be a bit more restrained and discriminating in Lebanon than they have been in Gaza?
I mean, there's certainly that hope, I would say, but so far, I would say we've already seen this affecting civilians across Lebanon, including in Beirut, as well as in the south, that started with the pagers and then with these continued operations. From Israel's point of view, these are targeted strikes, but they're all strikes in places that there are many civilians around. And when fighting a group like Hezbollah, that's, part of the strategy. And I would say, Hezbollah knows that there's people around them. Israel knows that there's people around them. And Israel says, look, it's worth it for us to go after these targets. But for the civilians in those areas, there's often not a way to really distance oneself. And there's going to be a lot of, so to speak, collateral damage here. And I think Israel is prepared for that. But it's something that Lebanon is certainly not and has had to absorb in the past. And there's going to be a lot of, I think, rallying around Hezbollah and the resistance, as much as people don't like them usually, if they see that they are also being targeted by this Israeli incursion.
I mean, is there hope, Charles, certainly on Israel's behalf, but which may be furtively shared by quite a few Arab governments, that this is Hezbollah's and Iran's bluff getting mightily called?
Yes. I mean, I think that one of the quiet parts of this entire conflict, whether it's in southern Lebanon or in Gaza, is that a lot of the state actors surrounding Israel are sort of quietly, or maybe even not so quietly, hoping that Israel sort of gets the job done, and that they're more than happy to see Israel, sort of carry the weight on all of this, because, again, this is not just a conflict against Hamas in Gaza or against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. This is a conflict against Iran, which has very few friends in the rest of the Middle East. And so this is sort of that moment.
Julie, nevertheless, the United States and many of other Israel's allies, as I was saying at the top of this item, would like this to stop before it starts. There is a worry, and I guess it's not an unreasonable one, that this could escalate past a point at which anybody really wants it to escalate. It wouldn't be the first time that a war has happened that nobody actually really wanted. Is there anything that the US could do that would actually stop Israel at this point, though?
I think it's really difficult to see that. I mean, I will say on the diplomatic front, both the US and, quite importantly, France have been working for months to try and get a diplomatic solution to this cross-border situation with Hezbollah and Israel, have not been effective. And I would point out there's still UN peacekeepers already on that border from a previous conflict. So it's not like this hasn't been litigated, so to speak, before. In terms of the U.S., I think there's obviously more leverage that the U.S. could be using with Israel in terms of, weapons and the military aid that the U.S. gives. With that said, as Charles rightly pointed out, this piece in particular, the U.S. also sees in part of the bigger regional Iran question that they're not, I think, less likely to pull back aid on that front. And I would also just point out I just don't think I don't think we're in the 80s anymore when Ronald Reagan just picked up the phone and called Israel and was like, you need to stop this now. We are way past that. Israel is way past that. There's some leverage the U.S. can use, but I don't think it's as simple as it was back in the day.
Well, back in the United States, meanwhile, House Speaker Mike Johnson has figured out who the real villain is in the struggle between Ukraine and Russia. In what turns out to have been only the second weirdest thing an elected American official has said or done in the last 24 hours, Johnson has has demanded that Ukraine sack its ambassador to the US, Oksana Markarova. Johnson's dudgeon has been inflamed by a visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to a Pennsylvania weapons factory at which only American Democrats were present. A reminder that both Speaker Johnson and Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump have declined to meet Zelensky during his current visit. Charles, is there some subtle subtext here which has escaped me, or is this as ridiculous as it seems?
This is a political nothing burger. There really is.
Come on, man! We've got to get 5 minutes out of this.
No, I mean, as far as was this election interference, and is this something worthy of a congressional investigation, which is also being called for by the Republicans? First of all, I mean, the Republicans now will investigate anything, or frankly, anybody in Congress will investigate anything that moves if it's to their political or perceived political advantage. Look, it's not the Ukrainians' fault, nor is it the fault of the Ukrainian ambassadors to the United States that one of the most productive weapons factories in the, arming the Ukrainians happens to be in the most pivotal swing state in the upcoming election. These kinds of trips happen all the time. There are trips where there are only Democrats in attendance. There are trips when there are only Republicans in attendance. It all depends on who's running the congressional delegation in that part of the given state. Did they have to run to one of the most controversial sort of battlegrounds in the election and sign missiles with Sharpie pens? Maybe that was a bit provocative. But honestly, these sorts of political stunts happen on both sides of the aisle. Both the other side of the aisle complains about it, and then it should, in theory, go away. We'll see if the Republicans will let this go.
Julie, is there, though, any actual advantage in this sort of behaviour? Because it is a recurring thing, and I'm sure Democrats have been guilty of it, but it does seem much more pronounced among American conservatives, is just inventing things to get mad at.
I mean, I think in this close to an election, you're going to see that constantly and in both directions. And I will say this one, to me, there's a bit of a throwback to kind of Trump's first impeachment, which regarded like foreign pressure on Ukraine to dig up. So I think that's been a constant theme of let's look at any time Democrats look like they might be using foreign policy stuff for an electoral advantage and pounce on that, even though the context is very different. But I think it does just underscore how partisan the Ukraine issue has become. And, I think it's notable that, who Zelensky is meeting, who he isn't. But I would say, he is meeting with Republicans tomorrow, including, I think, the head of the Senate Armed Services Committee and these kinds of things. And so it's partisan in how it's presented. And I think that's what this story is all about, trying to kind of get that up a little bit more. But I would agree with Charles, too. With that said, the media coverage around this visit also was a bit stuntish, to put it mildly, and like the signing and all this kind of stuff and the photo ops around it. So it had it did have its own purpose, but I wouldn't see it as being, this is not an illegal thing as much as maybe just like a bit of a stunt, let's put it that way. So,
nevertheless, Charles, there have been, well, to the extent that you can call anything Donald Trump says an actual policy pronouncement, because who knows what he would actually do about anything if he got the job back, but he has been increasingly unnuanced in his pronouncements was the word I wanted, about Ukraine.
Yes. He has basically said that with one single phone call, he's going to be able to end the conflict in Ukraine. And the concern is that whether it's one phone call or not, I mean, no president, particularly in military affairs, can act quite that unilaterally as Donald Trump imagines that he can act. And that's why also, by the way, you see all of these signings of deals of support. And there was one inked today by President Biden providing another, several $1 billion worth of support to Ukraine that presumably won't be able to be immediately undone if there's a Trump administration starting in January of next year. But there's a legitimate concern that he'll try to pull the plug on Ukraine And, this is part of his extremely unsubtle, you're absolutely right, pronouncements on America first and, his relationship with Putin, his relationship with Xi Jinping, and these absolutely bizarre claims in recent campaign trips where he's saying, people call me to ask whether they should be going to war or not. And, they ask my permission, and I can give my permission or I could not give my permission. And so if I say yes, they do it. If I say no, they don't. This is not the way foreign policy is conducted in anywhere but maybe North Korea.
Or indeed his own empty head. He has also said of Ukraine, Julie, that if we had made a bad deal, it would have been much better, which a sentence that even by his standards makes absolutely no sense at all. But if he does get re-elected and if he does maintain this course and if he does pull the plug on America's support for Ukraine, is that actually it for Ukraine? Can Ukraine survive, perhaps even win with merely European support?
So I would say obviously Europe is very aware of the possibility of a Trump presidency and has been trying to mitigate against that in regards to Ukraine. So there has been efforts to try and find other sources of funding in terms of, say, taking some of the assets that have been frozen or some of the interest from them, using that for the war effort, et cetera. So I would say Europe is looking for other options, but it will be difficult without the U.S. in terms of the military aid. Europe has really stepped up for overall aid, especially humanitarian, but the military aid has come overwhelmingly from the United States. And that's one reason why Zelensky is trying to get as much as possible in these remaining months when Biden is certainly still in office.
Well, listeners and indeed panellists of certain vintage who may feel existential unease at the thought of their childhood playthings becoming the stuff of museum exhibits may wish to hide beneath any available blankets. Nintendo has opened, or is to open, a museum in Kyoto. In fairness to Nintendo, the company has a history that reaches a long way back before the realization that so many could be so enthralled by compelling an Italian plumber to hurdle barrels dropped off scaffolding by an enraged gorilla. Nintendo was founded, fact fans, in 1889 as a playing card concern. Charles, demand for this museum is high. Tickets are being allocated by lottery. You have to book 3 months ahead. To me, what I've seen of it looks absolutely amazing, though not in any sense a gamer myself. I'm a massive sucker for those museums which present whatever it is as a sort of social history. You would be basically getting an interactive history here of the last 130 odd years of Japanese history.
And that's fairly interesting in itself. And you're right to point out
Japan, fairly interesting, says Charles Hecker.
Fantastic country. Been there many times, love it to bits, and I'm learning Japanese. But no, and it's great that actually not only is it the history of Japan, but the history of this industry and the history of this company. I hope that this museum is next to a museum of dinosaurs, because for those of us who don't entirely appreciate the role that Nintendo has played in ancient and modern society, I might go left towards the dinosaur museum, where I think I'll feel a lot more comfortable and see my sort of my fellow Luddites. But it's I'm glad that there is such a museum. I'm perfectly happy to let everybody else stampede for the tickets, and maybe I'll just sort of follow up a little bit later.
See, I am fairly sure that as an infant, Julie, I did own one of those portable dual screen Donkey Kong things, which LCD screen, but would fit in your pocket. You could kind of get away with playing it under the desk at school if you had a particularly inattentive relief teacher. Was thought of as the height of technical sophistication. Did you ever own any such device?
So I did not. So I did not have Nintendo or anything. I would go over to a friend's house though, and I think she stayed my friend because she had the Nintendo. So Kimberly, if you're out there, thanks for all the good Super Mario days. I
hope she's listening.
I do too. Everyone listens to Monocle, so she's out there. But I will say, Game Boy was
now realizing that Julie never liked me. It was just my Nintendo.
Sorry, Kim. No, but I would say Game Boy was it was a game changer. And I remember kids who had Game Boy. It was whoa, that was just that was such a thing. When I was growing up, and so that was my main Nintendo memory was kids with the Game Boys.
Charles, were you ever a part of any of this?
I was to a certain degree, because I recall that there was a convenience store next to my college dormitory when I was a first-year student, and it had a Pac-Man machine. Is Pac-Man Nintendo?
I'm not actually sure off the top of my head. Let's assume it is, or what isn't, or whatever.
And so we would go into the convenience store and pick up whatever it is that first-year students pick up in convenience stores. I wouldn't dare, guess these days. But we would take, a pocket full of quarters, and we would throw the quarters into the video game machine thing. And I would go there with all of my roommates, and we would take turn playing Pac-Man, and we would just be there forever and ever and ever. So yes, I did have a go in early days. This is a big upshift from my introduction to all of this, which is Pong, but Julie reminded me that is not a Nintendo product. That's a Brand X by somebody else.
Atari.
I did want to close by asking you both in turn. I'll ask you first, Julie. Is there, if not necessarily Nintendo, a thing, a toy, a pastime of your childhood that you would actually be excited to attend a museum of?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think I would need to think about that a little bit more. I mean, I guess there already is a Lego museum, isn't there?
I'm sure there's many.
Yes, so I guess that would be a fun one. I mean, I don't know. I would need to think on that one a little bit more. So go to Charles first.
Charles?
If there was a place where you could sort of sit all day and have huge arguments with siblings and parents as you tried to put together model airplanes and apply the decals only to have them slip off or fold or tear or have engines fall off. If there was a place where you could sit and do that all day, I'd be first in line.
See, I did attempt, I'm sure, at various points to do the sort of making little airfix fighter jets thing. It was never clear to me how anybody could find that process in any way enjoyable.
It was endlessly frustrating, and it required, you used tweezers and you used sort of tiny little sort of eyeglass screwdrivers to get all the pieces together. It never worked. But when it did, on the rare occasions that you actually got an entire aircraft together, it wasn't bad.
So what you would like is an airfix museum in which you could make airfix kits, but ideally in sort of soundproofed, reinforced rooms in which you could scream and throw the table over without doing any extraneous damage.
And if they sold beer, it would be even better.
You were drinking beer and making airfix models when you were a kid. There's your problem, Charles.
I wasn't, and I think that now that I'm a little bit older and above legal drinking age, I think this is the missing ingredient.
Julie, has that aroused any nostalgia in you?
No, I mean, I'll just lay my cards on the table. I was a big Cabbage Patch kid, but I cannot see a Cabbage Patch museum really making it as much as a Nintendo museum. So I'm just not sure that would work. But I will say that was my 80s nostalgia thing. I was a big Cabbage Patch kid.
I am absolutely certain, without even looking it up, that in some benighted hamlet somewhere in the United States there is a Cabbage Patch museum. You have to go there next time you're at home, and we want to hear all about it.
Done.
Julie Norman and Charles Hecker, thanks both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, our weekly letter from is a letter from Laura Kramer in Romania.
They look friendly, but they'll rip your face off, my aunt casually muses as we slowly drive past a bear and two cubs on Romania's Transfăgărășan mountain passway. They know that silly tourists will throw food, so bears, extra eager to get fat, shamelessly beg for snacks on the side of the road. We spotted 13 on a 10-kilometer stretch. Romania is home to roughly 8,000 brown bears, the largest bear population in the EU. But as their numbers grow, lawmakers are growing more concerned about the animals' impact on local communities. Enamored tourists and city dwellers fall for the rotund ears and puppy dog eyes the beasts have somehow mastered. Locals know better. They frequently get automated alerts signaling the presence of wildlife for a reason. As bears get more used to mankind and a taste for easy access to food, they inevitably start to wander further into the villages, posing danger for humans and livestock alike. This past summer, in a town some 20 kilometers away from the mountain area, locals were afraid to leave their homes as the animals roamed the streets. As for my family, not long ago, a bear snuck into a relative's property and killed 5 of his lambs in the middle of the night. With Romania's presidential elections looming, how to sustainably manage the bear population has become a hot-button issue for politicians, from calls to increase hunting quotas to plans to relocate them.
Nu putem să protejăm We cannot protect animals at the expense of people.
Meanwhile, authorities have imposed fines, installed surveillance cameras, and warning signs, all meant to discourage people from feeding the bears. Yet on our drive, we still witnessed a woman perched on the car window for a selfie, while another threw multiple apples.
Oh my God, it's so cute! Can I pet him?
We collectively shuddered at the speed of the bear to catch them, easily sliding under the railing, despite its impressive, enormous belly.
And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Julie Norman and Charles Hecker. Thanks also to Laura Kramer for that bit and HJ Mai at the top of the show. Today's show was produced by Tom Webb and researched by Sana Jamani. Our sound engineer was Sarah Nichol. I'm Andrew Millett here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.
"2024 is a pivotal year for global politics. Meanwhile, conflict, climate change, and AI dominate the headlines. What do these global stories mean for you? The Financial Times offers fearless thinking in defining moments. Its trusted journalists deliver impartial analysis on the world's biggest news events, helping you to form your own bold opinions. Start reading the Financial Times at ft.com.